So on the video webinar, or Zoom as you call it, are they still webinars? Is myself, Rupert Riesdale, Chief Executive of the Energy Managers Association, and Jacob Tompkins, who is the Chief Technical Officer of the Water Retail Company. But do you want to give a little bit of background of your knowledge base?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, mainly in the water industry. So worked as a water researcher for quite a long time, and then for an organisation called Water UK, and then an organisation called WaterWise, which promoted water efficiency. And now I'm doing the technology stuff at the Water Retail Company. So we are not Legionella experts. I'm going to talk about that later on, but we are certainly experts in water supply to businesses. And we've been asked by quite a few of our customers about this issue, which is why we're doing the webinar jointly with our friends at MX. We'll be doing something similar with an organisation called EcoProd later in the month as well, looking at appliances too.
So I don't think we're just setting the background. Obviously, this is a situation that, well, is unprecedented. A lot of your organizations will obviously have looked at lockdown, maybe not lockdown, sorry, shutdown. Maybe if you're hospitality over the winter period. However, there are particular issues surrounding the very quick shutdown of offices and people being denied access to offices. So let's kick off, Jacob, with opening so your view of how dangerous, well, the risks associated with quick lockdown.
Okay, so we're obviously going to go into this in detail, but one of the issues here is that quite often when businesses and sites close down for a long period of time, they're able to drown down their systems, they're able to close their check valves, they're able to do all the usual precautions you would take. What we're seeing now, buildings had to close very quickly. A lot of those things weren't done, tanks weren't emptied. And also lots of small businesses closed that probably never close for more than a couple of weeks while they go on holiday. And also these buildings have been closed not over the winter period, but in the spring. And we've had quite a lot of fluctuation in temperature, which means that, for instance, if you normally shut down your irrigation systems over the winter, when you open them up again, they are not that likely to be contaminated because you have no as much bacterial growth. But if you're doing this in the spring when there's been higher temperatures, there can be a greater risk there than normal. So the main problem is the buildup of stagnant water. So you've shut down the building. UK tap water is chlorinated and of the highest quality in the world. And despite what the Prime Minister accidentally said, there is no issue of COVID-19 from tap water whatsoever. Tap water itself is safe in the UK, but the effects of chlorine wear off after about a week. So the chlorine protection in the water is gone. And what you're getting now is a buildup of stagnant water, and then you're getting a buildup of biofilm and bacteria. Biofilm is effectively the slime that grows inside pipes. So this buildup of biofilm and bacteria, some of the bacteria you're going to get in there can actually be deadly. And the one that everyone is most concerned about is Legionella. This can grow normally within a week, particularly at the sort of temperature range that we're going to have within these pipes. So it's killed at above 60 degrees. Anything below there, nice, warm, stagnant pipes, perfect growing conditions. As we've said, the weather's been changeable, so there has been hot weather. And landlords and employees have a duty of care and specific legal duties in relation to Legionella. Our concern is that there's been very little guidance on what to do when you reopen your buildings. And if people are just reopen their buildings and not taking precautions over water, could be extremely dangerous. There's some quite good advice from wholesale water companies, from retail water companies, from the Drinking Water Inspectorate, but this is just an overview to highlight the things that you should be looking at.
Just kicking in there, Jacob. Can you give at the moment, I suppose people are used to the fact that hot water systems and hot water tanks can be affected with Legionella. Could you just run through any other systems that might be affected due to the nature of the lockdown?
Yeah, unfortunately, the cold water networks as well, because what we're seeing is normally when you get water from the mains, it's nice and cold. This stuff's been sitting there for quite a long time. It's probably reached the optimal temperature for bacterial growth. And then you've also got to think about any filters that you may have, any drinking water systems like plumbed in water coolers, even things like kettles you should be swilling out and wiping. We'll go into the detail of that. So for buildings that have already reopened, slightly late now, but you need to take immediate action. Systems need to have been flushed out. Staff and customers must be alerted to the risk. So there is a potential of Legionella and other bacteria within buildings that have just reopened this week. It's a bit like if you go to a holiday cottage or you've got a second home, you need to run the taps, or if you come back from your summer holiday, run the taps in your house because they've been sitting there in the pipes. The same thing for buildings, and the sorts of buildings we're talking about that generally don't have water management or water management systems are the SMEs, small cafes, restaurants. There are other things as well that they will need to be careful of. Buildings that are planning to reopen. So the first thing you should do is draw up a safety plan and find out who's responsible for that. So allocate this to someone, make a list of all the water using appliances in your building, make a list of all of your boilers, all of your cooling towers, anything like that you may have. And then you need to clean and check these systems at least 24 hours before opening. And the staff carrying out the work need to be protected. When we talk about protected, one of the main issues with Legionella is you can get it when particles go deep into the lung, and they can be carried by very small water droplets. So if you have an aerosol that's formed and you breathe in the water droplets from the aerosol and that contains Legionella, that's how you contract it. So wearing a mask is important while you're carrying out this work. Now, normally, there are specific World Health Organization guidelines for the type of mask you need to wear, and it needs to meet certain criteria. Given how difficult it is to get PPE equipment at the moment, anything that's going to be able to cover your mouth and prevent ingress of water droplets is better than nothing. So if you have masks with ventilators, use those. If you don't have those, just make sure that the face is covered. Also a good idea to wear gloves, but not if you're testing the water temperature, obviously. And then buildings that aren't reopening for a few more months, this gives you a long time to draw up a water safety plan. There's another bit there about discounts on your water bills. So some buildings have been classed as vacant. If they're classed as vacant, this means that all of your water bills can be suspended. So check that with your water retailer. It's also worth, if you think you're going to be closed for a couple more months, take remedial actions to help with prevention. So you could drain down some of the tanks. You could look at flushing through systems early on. And then you need to have a set of plans for reopening. And as we've said here, there are opportunities for water efficiency. What we mean by this is, if you are able to check your meters, there obviously shouldn't be any flow. If there's flow, it's probably likelihood of a leak. It also will give you an opportunity when you're going around and checking your water using appliances to look at the appliances you have in place. Probably you don't normally get the chance to do this. You can look at whether there's an opportunity for more water efficient equipment to be put in, or for some of them to be replaced. As we're going to talk about later, you'll need to check filters and things like this. So this gives a good opportunity to look at your equipment. And some wholesalers and retailers offer advice and discounts for water efficiency measures. So
Jake, sorry, Jake, Yeah, running through just a couple of questions from to make sure that, you know, sometimes the obvious questions, the ones that don't get asked. Can you just run through aerosols? So
Yeah.
water aerosols.
So effectively, they're small droplets of water suspended in the air. So if you are, and we're going to go into detail about how you should clean your systems, but if you suddenly turn on a tap after it's been turned off for a couple of weeks, there are variations in pressure. So the tap will splutter and suddenly squirt water out. And then as it hits the bowl, you will get small particulates thrown up into the air. Likewise with showers, you'll get the creation of steam and aerosols. Could be the same for toilet flushing. So in all of these circumstances, you've got water droplets suspended in the air that could be carrying Legionella and could go into the lung. We don't want to overplay the risk of this. You know, you just need to take sensible precautions, but Legionella can be deadly. And the other problem is that the symptoms of Legionella are pretty much identical to the symptoms of COVID-19. And what they saw in China is that 20% of the people who were presenting with COVID-19 also had Legionella. So there is a difficulty here that if some of your staff or customers suddenly start to get symptoms, the symptoms of Legionella and the symptoms of COVID are the same, so it may be masked. So yeah, just take sensible precautions. For instance, if you're cleaning, if you're running water through shower heads, hold them down below waist height if they're on a hose, so that they spray into the shower tray and produce less aerosols. Turn taps on very slowly, close the lid before you flush the toilet. Anything that can minimize water droplets getting into the air is good. And then, as I say, wear face protection to make sure it doesn't go into the lung. But once you've flushed out all of your systems, it should be reasonably safe. So you don't need to continue doing that. But the reason for doing this 24 hours before means that any water droplets in the air will have settled, and you also will start to get better pressure distribution within your networks.
Just on the steam issue, we'll move on in a second, but just on the steam issue, if steam is coming up, is that hot enough to kill Legionella?
Yeah, anything above 60 degrees should be okay. But remember that as you're flushing your systems through, imagine the network of pipes that you've got within your building. Having the boiler at 60 degrees is great, but it means that there will be variations in pressure across your network. So you may well get a mix of hot and cold water coming through. You may get a sudden spurt of hot water and then cold water. So yes, the steam should be okay, but you still shouldn't be breathing that in, because there may suddenly be a change in temperature, or Legionella may still be contained there. So yes, it's killed by water at 60 degrees, but if the water is moving and if there's variations in temperature, that's not a complete guarantee.
Okay, so Jacob, a couple of things coming up. We've got people who are throwing in questions, and please do, and we'll try and answer them as we're going along if they're, or leave them to the end if they're bigger issues. So Gavin Ponset has asked whether the slides will be available, and they will be available. The other thing, if there's specific questions, Jacob's email will be up afterwards, and if you want to give him a ring on this, then he'll be happy to talk. I think Gary, I can't do this without my glasses, getting old. Gary Livy has asked how long we should flush for, and I think we're going to deal with that in a minute, aren't we?
Yeah.
And John Agrimano has just asked, does Legionella develop in all kinds of climate? So if you could answer that one. Yeah.
It basically, for Legionella to develop, it needs to be wet and warm, pretty much. So there is a possibility of Legionella development in all of the buildings that have been closed. Given the temperature range it exists at, yeah, the answer is yes. And The things that you need to check are your water systems, but also your HVAC system, so air conditioning, things like that as well. Normally, because buildings are in constant use, Legionella isn't a problem. Larger buildings and bigger organizations quite often have cleaning of their systems, and they have checks for Legionella. But our worry here is that a lot of smaller businesses that don't normally think about these issues have been closed for quite a long period. So yes, I can't think of any buildings where it wouldn't be a threat, unfortunately. Potential.
And of course, that's an issue if you've got an estate with where you're focusing on the larger buildings and forgetting that, you know, say you've got schools or whatever, every building has to be dealt with the same way.
Even things like outdoor taps, yes, because the weather's been warm. So unfortunately, yes. So outdoor taps, small outside toilets, all that sort of stuff. You need to be aware of this issue.
Okay, should we move on to the next slide?
So what actions do you take? So the first bit is, and as Rupert just said, think about where your water using appliances are. This sounds a bit stupid, but as Rupert says, if you've got large estates or a factory or a building with over quite a large area, there will be outside taps, irrigation systems, things like that that you haven't that you don't normally think of. So if you can try and make a list of where water is used, and this includes non-plumbed in devices as well. So you may have water coolers, or as I said before, even kettles and things like this that have sat there with stagnant water in for, you know, a couple of months. They could be dangerous too. The next bit is if you have a complex site or vulnerable users, so if you're a clinic or something like that that hasn't been open, or if you've got high risk systems, so if you've got a water cooled air conditioning system or something like that, you may well need to disinfect. And if you're in this category, I would recommend calling in an expert. So either a plumber or a heating and ventilation air conditioning expert or a Legionella expert. There are lots of these available. I can certainly give advice and point you in the direction of some of the companies. The main thing to do is check that they're certified. So if it's a plumber, make sure they're a water safe plumber. If it's a company doing Legionella, then there's the Legionella Control Association, other organizations like that. These people do this day in, day out. They know how to clean systems. They know how to make sure you have a temporary trade effluent license for the whole stuff that's flushed out of your system. However, if you are a smaller company or you don't have a complex site or no vulnerable users, then you can do this yourself. But again, if you have any concerns, it's certainly worth talking to an external expert, and they'll just be able to give you some guidance as well. So the first thing is, if you're going to be cleaning the systems yourself or flushing through, as I said before, make sure you're wearing a mask, ideally HEPA filter mask, but they're difficult to get hold of at the moment. So anything, just any form of face covering if not. Ideally, if you're cleaning out systems, gloves is a good idea, but you can't wear those when you're testing water temperature. So the first thing to do would be to crank your boiler up to 60 degrees or more to kill any Legionella and pathogens. So leave the boiler on for an hour or so at least, so that you can have enough water to flush through your systems. The other bit is
Jacob, just
sorry, yeah.
Sorry, just we've got a few questions, but just on that, a lot of boilers will be set at below 60 degrees.
They will. So you could either refer to your manufacturer's specification. You could get a plumber in to do it for you. You could look at some of the overrides on the settings. Quite often boilers are set to around 50 degrees for energy efficiency issues. That will not kill Legionella. You've got to get up to 60 degrees. So you have to, otherwise it's just a nice Legionella soup. You've got to make sure that you fire your boiler up to these higher temperatures. And
just on that, is there a risk of scalding at 60 degrees?
Yes. So again, be careful doing that. There will be information on from the manufacturer on that. Also, there are, again, plumbers will be able to advise you on that, or the Bathroom Manufacturers Association have got advice on hot water and scalding. So any of these where you've got concern, seek external advice, or again, you can give us a call and we can give you some more detailed information, or you could talk to your other water retailer or water wholesalers. So empty and refill any storage tanks. So if you've got cold water storage tanks that have been left full, normally these would have been drained down before leaving, but because people had to leave quickly, may not be the case. It is worth, so what you don't want to be doing is flushing your system through with stagnant water that's been from a storage tank. So before you do any flushing through, make sure your storage tanks are emptied, and then you can refill them. Now, in between emptying and refilling, you could wipe around the water, you could wipe around the area where the water level is to get rid of any biofilm. You could also disinfect them, but you don't necessarily need to do those things. The main issue is make sure you empty and refill. But if you've got any concerns over the odor or the appearance of the water, then again, ask an external expert, because what happens is a film of bacteria will grow, particularly around the interface between air and water. And there, oh, sorry. Yes, Rupert?
Sorry, yeah. So if I just run through the questions, I know sometimes but so Philip Wilson has asked, in stagnant water, will scale continue to form?
Ah, it's a very good point. Yes, it will, but only to a certain extent. So what, particularly in hard water areas, what you get is a repulsive combination of limestone deposition and biofilm. So it effectively makes a porous lining in pipes and things that bacteria can then inhabit. So yes, scale will form. One of the other things that you need to be careful of when you flush your systems through, particularly if you've got taps with aerators or filters on the end of them, is that when you flush the system, it may well dislodge any scale or particulates that have accumulated in the pipes while it's been empty. So you'll probably need to unscrew any filters or aerators that are on the end of your taps. So yes, unfortunately, that's something else. I mean, if a really good example is if you've ever been to like a holiday cottage or a caravan with a kettle, you'll see that quite often there is a very big scale buildup around the edge of the water and the air, which is where there's been calcium deposition. So yes, that is the case. Sorry, any more questions, Rupert, before I...
Yeah, so Mike Entwistle, how would you recommend flushing showers with a fixed shower head which can't be moved below waist height?
Yeah, okay. So with those, you can either, the main problem is the first flow. So either you can turn it on, close the door and move away whilst wearing a mask, or you can catch it in a bucket that you can hold up. But again, be careful if it's very, very hot water. So anything that you can do to limit the amount of aerosol generated. So the first thing is when you turn these showers and taps on, turn them on slowly, don't turn them on full. If you turn them on immediately, you will straight away generate an aerosol. If you turn them on slowly, so there's a slow flow through first, you're less likely to generate an aerosol. You can use bags, but again, they'll fill very quickly and become quite heavy. So you just need to balance your risk. So for showers where there's a fixed head, absolutely wear a mask, turn it on slowly, and then while it's running, go and do something else.
So Neil Dudman has asked, is it, when you're talking about flushing, do you not mean hot water cylinders rather than the boiler? But I suppose there are pipes within the boiler that things could build up in.
Yes, so, sorry, by flushing, so what I'm saying is, first of all, you should empty and refill any storage tanks with cold mains water in. Then you should make sure you've fired up your boiler. Yes, if you've got a hot water cylinder as well, you will need to run the taps for longer, and we'll come on to that in a second. So when we say fully flush your hot and cold system starting from nearest the supply, what we mean is obviously the tap that is closest to the boiler or where the mains come in. Yep. So you gradually open all of your valves and taps, moving from closest to the supply or the boiler to the furthest away. As you do this, you will slowly drain your hot water tank, and you'll start to be getting the boiling water from the boiler coming through. So you need to do this until the water at the tap is, again, around 60 degrees. I think it's about 55 that you could go to. So you could do that with a thermometer, or you could tell that it runs until it is completely hot. You've basically got to flush the system completely through until you're getting the new hot water from the boiler coming through. There are a lot of conflicting pieces of advice over how long this will take. I've seen some wholesale water companies saying a couple of minutes. I know that the Canadian government have recommended 30 minutes. So it won't be longer than 30 minutes, but in some circumstances, I would say that you should be running the taps for about 10 minutes. And if it is a tap in a remote location, as we said before, like an outdoor tap, that could be up to 30 minutes. In terms of flushing the cold system, so you can do these separately, you've got to do the same thing. And again, it could take up to 30 minutes. There is an issue if you're in a shared building. You will need to coordinate with the landlord and with other tenants. Otherwise, you'll be flushing your bit of the system through, but their part of the system will still be stagnant. So you need to make sure that the landlord has ensured that all of the systems are flushed through. And then as you're doing this flushing, you need to check filters and aerators within the taps themselves. So if you can unscrew shower heads, even fixed head ones, if you can unscrew aerators on the end of taps, if you can, and if you've got, for instance, hoses in a yard, if you can unscrew and flush all of these through, that would be great, because as I've said, there may well be particulate matter that's built up within those or dislodged from the pipes. You'll also need to be careful of splashing and scalding, as Rupert said, because what's going to happen is we'll see businesses generally coming back online at about the same time, which means there will be massive variations in pressure that the water companies are going to have to deal with. And as you get these variations in pressure, you will get spluttering, and you'll get stops and starts, and you'll get variable flow. So be aware that when you turn on a tap, the flow rate might not be the flow rate you normally expect from that tap. It could just be a trickle, or it could suddenly spurt out really quickly and splash you. So gradually open all of your valves and taps. And then in terms of filters and drinks appliances, so if you've got even a jug with a water filter, or a plumbed in water cooler, or a point of use boiler, or a kettle, any of these things will also have had stagnant water in them. In terms of the filters, if they are drinking water filters for jugs and that sort of stuff, I would recommend that you replace those. If they are filters within your water system, make sure they're flushed through, check the manufacturer's details, because you can get bacterial growth within the filters themselves. So just because you've got a filter, it doesn't mean that you're protected, in case in some circumstances it could be worse. This also includes the drinking water filters or the ice machines within fridges that you need to have a think about. So if there is an ice machine or an ice machine in the door of a fridge, dispose of all of the ice, and again, let that run through. Same thing about wiping a kettle. And then you need to consider other water using areas. So this could be fountains or water features, which could well get a bacterial biofilm building up on them. Probably you have a maintenance contractor who might be doing those for you, but again, be careful of the aerosols from fountains. HVAC, So I'm certainly not an expert on air conditioning or heating and ventilation stuff. There are separate experts for that. So if you have an air conditioning unit that uses water, I'm not talking about radiators, I'm talking about the air conditioners that you sometimes get in the ceiling, sometimes they're water-based. Check the manufacturer's details on those. In terms of irrigation, we talked about that earlier. You will have normal procedures for maintaining your irrigation equipment. This situation will be slightly different because normally you'll shut down the irrigation over the winter. In this circumstance, it's been shut down over the spring. The temperatures will be different. And any other things like cooling towers. So you will have a process for maintaining cooling towers, but again, it's unlikely that they've ever been turned off for this long. So check the manufacturer, check with a cooling tower expert. It's also worth checking. Oh, sorry, can we go on to the next one slide, please?
Just while we're moving on to the next slide, the this webinar will be is being recorded and will be available to be streamed on YouTube later. I think unfortunately Chris is dealing with the slides. There we go.
Right, so these are the wider actions. So if you've declared your site vacant, so if the site has been vacant for a long time, or if you've registered it with your retailer as vacant, then it's a good idea to talk to your water company and tell them you're going to reopen. First of all, it means that your billing will be right, that they'll be able to read your meter for the time you reopen. It also means that if you're a particularly large site or a high water user, your water company will be able to tell the wholesaler, so they will know what pressures to expect on their network. As we've said, it's a difficult time for water suppliers because there's a lot of variable pressure on the network. So if you're a massive chemical company that's about to reopen, please tell your water company so that they don't suddenly get a massive demand in that area, which can cause problems. This is the other thing. So as we said, the Prime Minister unfortunately said about COVID in water. That is not the case at all. Mains water is perfectly safe in terms of the virus. The stuff that you're getting from the mains is fine. What we're talking about here is water within your own building. Once you've flushed it through and you're getting mains water again, that will be great. However, the taste and the appearance and the pressure may be slightly different to what you normally expect. You've probably noticed that there are variations in the level of chlorination of water. So some people have been noticing that their water smells a lot more of chlorine. That's because water companies have been increasing water dosing to try and prevent bacterial growth. In terms of appearance, you may well get trapped air within the water supply as you reopen. This will give your water almost like an opaque look, so that it's trapped air bubbles, so it'll have a milky white appearance. If you've got any concerns, talk to your water company, but that's fairly normal for when you reopen. And pressure will vary. So as I've said before, be careful of some taps not running very well or some taps splashing all over the place, because there will be pressure variations as you restart your networks and as the water companies repressurize bits of their network. The other thing as well is if your building's been closed for a couple of months, it may well be that you will see large scale leakage on your network because these pipes basically have had still water in them, and then suddenly you've increased the pressure and that can cause a burst. So as you reopen, be aware of bursts, check for bursts, look for water leaks or anything like that around your business, because this is a higher risk time. The other thing is inform your staff and customers about the action you've taken. So that will reassure them that the water is fine, but it also means that your staff will be alert if they see leaks or water problems or changes in pressure or changes in temperature. And if there are risks, say, for instance, if you've reopened without looking at your water system, then please warn people of these risks, because as we've said, the symptoms of Legionella and the symptoms of COVID-19 are very similar. And then the other thing is, if you have managed to set up a water plan, and if you've gone round and you've flushed through your networks and you've had a look at all of your water systems and you've cleaned out valves and things like this, this is quite a useful opportunity to put in place, if you don't have one, a plan for constantly monitoring your water quality and quantity. It means that you can ensure water quality all the time. Also means you could look at things like water efficiency or where you could save water. And again, if you're on a shared property, check that the landlord and the other tenants are aware and are taking action, and also tell them what you're doing. Because if you suddenly start to drain your network and turn all of your taps on, that will drop the pressure in other parts of the building. It may also cause variations in water quality in for other tenants. So basically communicate.
Jacob, on this legal responsibility for taking these actions, people have been put in prison for not dealing with Legionella.
Yeah, so there are two there. One is there is a general duty of care for health and safety by employers and landlords. The other one is there are specific legislation around Legionella, and it is the duty of every landlord and employer to prevent exposure to Legionella, or words to that effect. This is difficult because we haven't been in this position before. And if you're a large company, you probably have people checking for Legionella already. If you're a small, news agent or cafe that may reopen at some point, you've probably never had to do this before. You may have had check once a year, but it's a difficult thing to do. So as I've said before, there are accredited bodies like Water Safe Plumbers or companies that are members of the Legionella Control Association or others. There are also testing kits where you can test for Legionella yourself. Be very careful in using these, particularly if you're not an expert or you're not an FM manager or anything like that. The easiest way as well is to use a thermometer. So it's worth checking that you've reached an acceptable temperature that could kill Legionella when you've been running the taps. It's also worth noting down what you've done. So when you've done it, so just a simple log saying, on the 23rd of June at 2 o'clock, you opened all of these taps or valves and you let them run for 15 minutes and you reached a temperature of X. So documenting any of that stuff, first of all, means that you know that you've done it properly. Secondly, it protects you from a legal perspective because it shows that you've taken preventative measures. And thirdly, it's the right thing to do. So all of this is fairly common sense. It's about thinking where your water use is. It's about getting a plan. It's about taking these actions and then documenting it.
So
the other one I didn't mention is drains, which is not a Legionella risk, but it is a problem. So quite often drains, and in particular floor drains, have a water trap to prevent odors from the sewer coming back in. These will probably have evaporated. So you'll need to top up your drains. So the drains under your sinks and urinals and all that sort of stuff will probably be topped up as you flush through. But things like floor drains won't be. So it's worth putting a bucket of water down any floor drains just to reinstate the water trap to prevent things like hydrogen sulfide and stuff coming back up from the sewers. And that's why when you reopen the building, there may well be a musty seweragey smell. Is probably due to the floor trap drains evaporating.
So a couple more questions. Sorry, on the Paul McGuigan said the reference to China. I suppose hospitals here, 20% testing. I suppose hospitals here will be testing for Legionella.
I don't know. So the reference to China was in the Lancet about a month ago. and it was based on academic research. I don't know whether they're testing for Legionella in the UK. I haven't. One of the reasons we're doing this webinar is I haven't seen much guidance from government about Legionella. It's effectively pneumonia, so the symptoms are again very similar. I would hope that medical staff are aware of this, but I think that the actions that we're talking about taking and the actions that other water companies and regulators have been highlighting to the businesses hopefully will prevent a spike in Legionella. But it is a risk, and I think the reason it's a risk is in the UK we are very, very lucky that we have perfect water supplies for most of the time, so you don't think you can get ill from water networks. Large businesses, as I say, probably know about Legionella, but a lot of the smaller businesses that have never been closed for this long probably don't.
Yeah, just on the point, because the government is saying they're going to monitor sewage for because COVID will be in, but I suppose the sewage is not a problem.
No, so it's a very good question. So there is an organisation called Surfers Against Sewage, actually, who have produced quite a useful, accessible article on sewerage pollution from COVID. So yes, COVID-19 has been detected in sewerage, and it's being used to track levels of infection in the Netherlands, I think. Just because it's in sewerage, yes, there is potential for it then to get into rivers and potentially into water treatment works. But frankly, it is very, very unlikely for it to be able to survive in sewerage and to be able to survive the treatment that sewerage goes through and to be able to then survive in a river and to be able to survive and particularly chlorination in water supplies. So there is not a risk of COVID-19 from water supplies, none at all. There is not a risk.
Sewerage,
there have been no instances yet of transmission through sewerage, and I think it's very, very unlikely.
So Gavin has asked, where can I source the test kits you mentioned?
Okay, there are quite a few of those. It depends on the building and what you're specifically looking for. But if you want to drop me an email or give your contact details, I can send you some, not some kits, some information on where to get them from.
Excellent. So we'll throw it open to any questions. Sorry, we've now talked at you for 45 minutes, and hopefully we've covered a lot of the ground. This is recorded. We will be making it available to people to have a look at. But I realize that a lot of you are going to face very specific questions from your sites, and do please give us a call to look at. Jake and I both work for the Water Retail Company, which is a retailer, and if you have any questions about working with your wholesaler, we can deal with that as well, or with your retailer. What we're finding with the sites we actually work with is there's some very interesting opportunities coming out of the shutdown. So leakage is, I suppose, one of the things. Jacob, do you want to run through that, how people should look at leakage?
Yeah, shall we just go to the last slide, which I don't remember, oh yeah, there we are. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so leakage, it depends whether you get access to your building or not, but what we are seeing with some of our clients is obviously at the moment consumption should be around zero. There will be some things like water softeners and things like that that might still be running, or pools with backwash, but in general there shouldn't be flow, and there should certainly not be nighttime flow. So if you take readings from your meter, and you can do that over a 24-hour period, so take one and then one the next day, it'll give you an idea of whether you are seeing flow or not. The other thing is that given that your building isn't being used, it should be much easier to see if there is water accumulating in certain areas, or you've got large damp patches either on the walls or the floor, and this should give you an idea of where leaks are occurring. If you think you've got leaks, there are specialist leak companies you can use, or the thing I would do is to talk to your water retailer or your water wholesaler, and they will have advice on how to find and detect leaks. There are also allowances where you can get money back on your sewerage bills if there's been a leak. I think as well as leaks, it's also quite a good opportunity, as I've said, if you're going to be going around and looking at all of your water using appliances, it's a good opportunity to see whether any of your taps or shower heads could be replaced with water efficient ones, because people don't often have the time to go around and look at their water systems, and since you've got to do this, it's a good opportunity to do that. So, and thirdly, I think for those of you who don't know, there is a competitive market for water retail. So, so if you now might be a good opportunity to shop around for a different supplier. As I say, we are one of them, but there are 20 others as well.
Yeah, but obviously we're the best. And we can run through a lot of these other issues. Okay, is there any other issues, Jacob, you think we haven't covered that people should be aware of?
No, I think that's about it. I mean, the main thing is that water contamination can kill people. So this is an extremely serious issue. On the other hand, people have got enough to worry about at the moment. And if you take these actions, water can be made safe quite easily. If you have very major concerns specifically about your site, then use a plumber or a Legionella expert and make sure they're accredited. And if you are going to flush the systems yourself, make sure that you're wearing appropriate safety equipment, mainly a mask. And I would say plan your opening and do this 24 hours in advance, and then that should be fine. But if you've got any questions, as Rupert said, you can either talk to us or talk to your water retailer or wholesaler. And if you're a large site and you're reopening, then you should be telling them anyway because of variations in pressure.
Excellent. Well, thankfully, the government have made it incredibly clear how we're all going to reopen, and well, yeah, perhaps not. So I think it's going to be quite difficult for people when they do, with the fact the government's not being very clear over how many sites are going to open again and to what level. But I suppose the real message coming out of this before we end is it doesn't matter if you partially reopen sites, it's as dangerous because you might have forgotten elements in it. I mean, flushing through your coffee machine and other sort of kitchenette
water
devices.
softeners, things like that people won't have thought of.
Yeah, so it is incredibly important to go out there because Legionella is a killer, and you do have legal responsibilities. But as Jacob said, it's the right thing to do.